All right. I've got three speakers. Mr. Machado is first. Mr. Machado.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike Machado, Executive Director of the Delta Protection Commission. Referring to the language from staff proposals, and I spoke to it last meeting about the consistency between policy for development in the legacy communities that are in the primary zone to be consistent with the Delta Protection Act of 1992. The language proposed by staff states that new development effective the date of this policy. We're in the process now with local counties doing their general plan and revising their Delta element to be in compliance and consistent with the Land Use Resource Management Plan of the Delta Protection Commission. With this going forward, they could delay coming into compliance. They could affect a change in the boundaries of the legacy communities on the adoption of this plan. Those could be acceptable under this language by the council, but would not be consistent with the Delta Protection Act that delineated the boundaries in 1992, which I would believe should be a statutory change by the legislature to redefine the development to take place within the legacy communities as defined in the
primary zone.
In the primary zone. And that delineation is not here with respect to Mountain House and Bethel Island.
Yeah. So is that true?
Well, I myself, I don't see that there's the conflict that Mr. Machado does. I mean, it means that the local governments still will have the responsibility of complying with the basic requirement of the Protection Commissions Act, which would be that they can't propose densities and intensities of use that are greater than what were allowed in the time that the Protection Commissions Act was passed. We're not interfering with their ability to do that. They'd have a dual requirement here that they would, we in reviewing development would be looking for consistency with the general plans that are in effect, and others have questioned, that point about the effective date of this policy. Some have suggested it should be the effective date of the Delta Plan, or the adoption of the date of the adoption of the Delta Plan. But we're always going to be in a situation where some local governments are moving towards compliance with a natural resource management plan.
Well, I'm
creating a double standard.
Yeah, wait a minute. I want to get Mr. Siegel's input on this discussion. You've seen it now for a whole long time.
Well, it's a policy question. It's not a legal question. You basically have two entities with concurrent and somewhat overlapping jurisdiction.
Right.
And what you do doesn't alter the jurisdiction or the regulations of the Delta Protection Commission. And likewise, what they do doesn't alter your jurisdiction or your regulations. So it's a policy call whether or not you want to have jurisdiction over Bethel Island or a policy governing Bethel Island or one of the other legacy communities, even though there may or may not be similar restrictions under the Delta Management Plan or Resource Management Plan of the Delta Protection Commission. It's a policy call. It's not a legal call.
Don, then Pat.
Well, it doesn't kind of hinge, though, if I understand what we're talking about here. One of the important distinctions is both for Bethel Island but for Mountain House as well, that those are not in the primary zone. All the other communities are within the primary zone, exception of obviously Isleton is carved out because of the original act, but I mean as a city, but those unincorporated towns or communities are all in the primary zone. And so therefore called legacy communities, but you're talking about the ones in the primary zone versus the ones in the secondary zone.
So what I'm talking about is as the counties are redoing their general plans and their Delta element, if they restate the boundaries for the communities that are in the primary zone, expand them from what was in place in the 1992 Delta Protection Act, and they would be, based on this language, could be effective at the date of this policy from the council's perspective for growth, but would be inconsistent with the jurisdiction of evaluation by the Commission with respect to consistency with the Delta Protection Act of 1992. So you could take Clarksburg, for example, that draws a line, a new line that expands Clarksburg. They haven't come to the Delta Protection Commission for consistency with the Land Use Resource Management Plan because they're redoing their general plan. They delayed doing that, But they approve it at the county level. They delay doing that to the effective date of this plan, so they can come back and argue, well, we're consistent with what's been put forward by the Stewardship Council and the Delta Plan because we've expanded, and it's expanded prior to the effective date of this policy, therefore it's acceptable. But and under the Delta Protection Act, we would be looking at it from the...
I think he's right.
Pardon?
I think you're right. Our policy would have the unintended consequence of undercutting the commission's policy.
And I think it creates a dilemma between the two agencies.
In the primary zone.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
In the primary zone.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's a concern of the council, one thing to do would be to put something, insert language saying this doesn't affect or is not intended to in any way affect the regulations of the Delta Protection Commission.
We got into this box because we thought we had to define legacy towns, and of course, with a couple exceptions, there are no boundaries that have a legal status. Therefore, we took reference to the general plans of the counties involved. In Contra Costa's case, there was also an urban limit line, which didn't occur in other counties, and tried to figure it out that way. But the reality is the counties has designated areas around legacy communities in the primary zone that are larger than the boundaries that existed when the Delta Protection Commission was started, when the policy was clear that primary zone expansion was not encouraged in legacy communities. So this is now the way I understand it. So the real dilemma is, since the Delta Protection Commission is still operating under its statutory mandate, and we picked boundary just because we willy-nilly went out and found, Mountain View, the county general plans have been updated, and they identified land that might be developed. We've treated that now as within a boundary that we're recognizing. I mean,
Well, there actually hasn't been, I would just say, I don't think there's been a lot of changes in anybody's general plan that reflects, you may use the Clarksburg example, I don't know that that's the case.
I'm using it as an example, not a fact, but as an example.
Right, so but I think...
well, you really mean Linden. You meant to use Linden as a
We're outside
description
the
as if
primary
it
zone.
were in the primary zone.
And
Yes.
really, we're only talking about, unless my memory is off, in terms of the county plans, we're only talking about 2 counties, because only Sacramento and Yolo have got these communities inside their boundaries.
Right.
And, the others, Isleton and the waterfront portions of Rio Vista, of course, would also be applied.
Well, Knightson is not...
Knightson's not in the primary zone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think both those general plans have been completed. Both Yolo and Sacramento, I think, have completed their general plans updates. I don't know if
Yolo's in the process.
Are they still in process? I know we completed.
I think Yolo's has been, your general plan was updated, my recollection last year.
The Delta element hasn't been submitted yet.
Okay.
Which county, Mike? Yolo or?
Yellow. And,
Yellow.
and Sacramento's element is under consideration, and there's some discrepancies there that need to be resolved.
But clearly, nothing we're doing is intended to undermine the Protection Commission's authority. This is one of a variety of areas where we're going to have dual jurisdiction with other agencies. We'll never be at a place where everybody's work is all completed at the same time, and we can make sure everything is harmonious with everybody.
Can I suggest a language that may solve this? As of the effective date of this policy by city or county general plans for development, and consistent with the Delta, what's it called? The Delta
The
Protection
Act of 1992.
So you just say it's consistent with the policies as of the effective date of this policy and the Delta Protection Act.
Are we trying to get at the Bethel Island and Mountain House?
No, I don't think so.
No, but I
This
mean,
is not about those.
is that why you have a effective date now, because of those 2?
There was the question. Someone asked, well,
When is it
local
effective?
governments can change their general plans. What general plan are we talking about? So we said, well, the one that's in effect now. And we chose the term as of the effective date of this policy. Others have suggested it should say as of the date of the adoption of the Delta Plan. One of the challenges always has, my impression when having served on the Protection Commission in part, is that what did Yolo County's general plan look like in 1992? Someone needs to do that analysis. I got to concede we haven't done it because we've been working with the plans that are available from local governments.
Well, I would just say from Sacramento County's perspective, that's 2 general plans ago as well. So
Yeah.
that goes back a ways. But
Well, look, here, if I thought that the boundaries of what we call legacy towns in the primary zone that we're referencing, or the boundaries that would exist in county plans, once our Delta Plan becomes effective, if they were the same as the boundaries that existed in 1992, then there would be no problem.
That's correct.
But there are probably changes. Isn't that right, Don?
yeah, they may be minor. I don't know. But
Well, I know, but
well, yeah, that was
well, but that's the big fight about the old mill.
right.
Yeah, and that's which of course you didn't discuss, Mr. Machado, I know, but that's
I was a part of that discussion
Right.
that went on to 1 o'clock in one of the coldest places
many
I can remember.
times. Well, I've never been comfortable with the boundary stuff anyway because the county designated boundaries are not automatically legal boundaries for a community. They are planning purpose boundaries for the county. And this approach has tended to incorporate those planning boundaries as if the council ratifies them.
I mean,
And that has implication for a
We
whole
have reviewed
bunch
them,
of
though, to make sure that they're boundaries that are consistent with the services that are available, that they reflect the existing land use pattern, that they're not providing a platform for substantial new development that would seem to threaten Delta resources.
The Delta Protection Act, as I understand it, and I don't pretend to bring a lawyer's interpretation of it, is that the growth in the legacy towns that were defined in the Delta Protection Act is limited to the boundaries that were established in the general plans by those counties in 1992. So statutorily, even though they may draw another circle around that, they cannot grow beyond what the boundary was in their general plan of 1992.
Unless what?
Unless the statute is
Unless
changed.
statutes
The
change.
legislature acts?
Yes.
I'm just listening.
No, I know. I'm just that's.
Yeah.
How dare the legislature do
Well,
that?
there was certain.
92. Well, then what do we have before us when the commission, and certainly Patrick was part of this too, when we heard the item about the sugar mill project, because that was boundaries, and we had to make certain findings under the land use and resource management plan. But why were we even debating that issue if that's the case? I guess
I wasn't the executive director then.
No, I know.
Trying very hard not to.
Don, it was in the community, but it was
Yeah.
an industrial use.
was industrial
It
use
wasn't
plus-
changing the boundary.
Right.
Well, but the implications.
Right.
Let's take
My understanding.
Let's take Clarksburg as an example. The implication is if the county of Yolo has expanded what they consider the designation of urbanizable new development Clarksburg, and they have in the old mill, that we're saying, okay, 100-year flood protection for that new development is okay. The new development may never occur. Delta Protection Commission might say no. But we've said, yeah, it's okay, 100-year flood protection.
Well,
That's why I think you could add the language about being consistent with the Delta Protection Act, and you then eliminate that concern. So they have to be consistent with current boundaries and the Delta Protection Act.
Well, if you were worried about flood protection for areas that are currently not occupied by people, but would be occupied by people if the new boundaries involved, you'd have to amend policy number 2. This is item number 10, appendix, I guess, where we say new residential development of 5 or more parcels outside of defined urban and urbanizing areas shall provide a minimum of 200-year urbanizing areas as identified in the 1992 enactment, because this clearly would indicate that only 100, I mean, by implication, it would indicate that in Clarksburg, if that project is ever approved, that 100-year flood protection, at least so far as our plan's concerned, is okay.
And that has, nothing we're doing today is changing that. That has been the, policy regarding flood development since I arrived here.
Which policy?
The one that, the proposal that 200-year flood protection would not apply in legacy communities. Since when I arrived here, that was the way the plan was drafted. So it's not a new change that we're indicating, we're proposing here. The legacy communities have been excluded from that policy as long as I can remember.
So what we're talking about is confirming the boundaries, right, for purposes of locating new development wisely. That's the policy, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we reference the boundaries of the Delta Protection Act and the jurisdiction of the Delta Protection Commission for all those that are in the primary zone,
Well,
leaving the others to be subject to the question of what their boundaries are, and maybe their boundaries are the effective date of this policy?
I think if we could do that. If we could go back, we could locate what I understand would be the general plans that were in place in 2002. They may allow more development than is allowed under the current general plans, or they may allow less.
Why picking 2002?
1992. I'm sorry, 1992. We could go locate those plans. We could look at those maps and see what they have to say. I'm just trying to find a way to confirm where these policies that have been part of the plan for a long time, where they apply. That's how we got into this.
Yeah.
I think it'd make a lot of sense, as Joe has suggested, to add a provision that would say that nothing in this plan is intended to indicate that the Delta Plan encourages development beyond that approved by the Delta Protection Commission.
Right.
It's specified in the Delta Protection Act.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you reference the Delta Protection Act?
Happy to do that.
For all, period, for all the communities that are affected by it, which are the primary zone. I think that's Mike's point. And then if you're outside the primary zone, well, now, I guess we got to use a date that starts when we establish this policy, because we don't have law to control.
I think that makes sense.
Mr. Machado, say something, not just nod your head.
I concur with Councilman Johnson's suggestion, because those are in place. If there's a question that those need to be changed because they were established statutorily, it should be done statutorily.
Okay. Mr. Siegel, Mr. Johnston's observation is coming close to a motion, but it's not yet. Could you opine on the subject, please?
I think it's doable. It's a drafting issue that Dan had come up, I guess, with a simple way of drafting the regulation, or these three regulations.
If there is anything we have learned in this process, there is no simple drafting of anything.
But I think it's doable. I think it's going to take a little bit of wordsmithing to make sure that that the policies are redrafted to be accurate. But I don't think it's a problem.
I think the maps are important too. I think it would be important to actually get a copy of those 92 plans and put boundaries and include them in the appendix. As hard as that would be, I think it's useful for everybody to know exactly what we're saying when we say it. So I know that's more work for
the commission has those maps.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so we don't want the tail to wag the dog. We don't want Bethel Island and Mountain House to redetermine what's got a long history in statute and oversight by the Delta Protection Commission.
Yeah.
If you make that as a motion and we confer with Councilmember Johnson about the language, I think.
No, I
that's
think
acceptable.
Mike raised the issue and has it right. I think we ought to reference.
There, can I make
Yeah.
just another suggestion? I've been thinking about this. There's a certain amount of factual uncertainty about the status quo that we haven't nailed down. One possibility is to direct our staff to include in the Delta plan two options for this. One, the language as prepared by the staff in this policy, and two, that language except referencing the territorial boundaries back to the 1992 legislation, or what existed when the 1992 legislation existed for legacy communities within the primary zone only. Now that I'm a little tentative on that, but it's one of those things where we're doing a supplemental volume on the environmental impact report, gives us a little time to breathe, keeps the options available that we hadn't had a chance to examine in detail.
I would suggest that it's important to recognize, because the legislature recognized that, the division of the Delta into the primary and the secondary zone. I understand the council has jurisdiction over the legal Delta and beyond, as directed by the legislature. But if you preserve that distinction for the land use within the primary zone, then I think we avoid conflicts, and we're very definitive to those counties affected as to what the status is of the legacy communities. And that should serve its purpose for the commission in terms of continuing its function. It shouldn't interfere with the council in terms of its oversight of the Delta and those areas outside of that, because it seems that the objectives of both the council and the commission with respect to development in the Delta, and in particular the primary zone, is consistent. The second part of this is, and it's aside from the discussion today, is that if the counties are not as happy with what the definition is of the 1992 Act, then the counties can go back and statutorily see if they want to try to change that. But we do preserve, as Councilman Johnson has said, what has been going on for the last 20 years, and it seemingly has worked. And if you recall, there's been only one challenge to that in that course of that 20 years.
I'm just thinking, I'm not sure whether there have been changes to the boundaries of the legacy towns since 1992, as opposed to certain use designations within the boundaries. So it may be that you want to direct staff to work with Senator Machado to see whether or not the boundaries in 1992 are depicted on the map that Dan wanted to use to define legacy communities. Because if the map depicts what existed in 1992, then that might be the simple way of taking care of this issue.
Here's the language I would suggest. And it would begin it would say significant new development, including residential, commercial, and industrial uses, must be limited to areas designated by city and county general plans for development as of the effective date as of the adoption of the Delta Plan. In cities, their spheres of influence, areas within Contra Costa County's voter-approved urban limit line, except for Bethel Island and the Mountain House General Plan community boundaries, as shown in Figure 5.1, or within Isleton, Rio Vista, and Knightson, as shown in Appendix K, or in the communities within the Delta's primary zone, including Clarksburg, Cortland, Freeport, Hood, Locke, Ryde, and Walnut Grove, to areas that are designated for development in compliance with the Delta Protection Act.
Legally, that's okay.
It made sense to me, but it seems like it may be a lot for everybody to comprehend. It would be useful to have Senator Machado.
I want to circle back to Contra Costa County. You've been listening to this. Bethel Island's not in the primary zone, so it's not really the focus of this discussion. Is there anything in the kind of problem we're wrestling with outside the county's boundaries that gives you pause?
No.
Do you have a perfect solution to give to us as a neutral party?
I wish I did.
All I would like, before anyone makes let's see, we've got a motion. We've got a motion. Before we vote on the motion, I'd just like to make sure that whatever we adopt, we don't later find from a factual discussion that there's a fact that we didn't know existed on boundary changes in a general plan that would cause us to want to reevaluate this. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. So I don't know. Figure it out. Don?
Well, I think Dan, I think, tried to capture that in. That's a very long sentence, but nonetheless, I think he tried to capture the essence of some of this discussion. I think, to your point, Mr. Chair, there may be something of factual nature that might trip us up. Again, since we're going to have this back to us in a few weeks, it would seem to me that there could be some validation of what's been talked about here. I think that it expressly deals with the primary zone and the secondary zone and the communities that are part of either one of those particular parts of the Delta. So maybe from the standpoint of the motion that's on the floor to get the Bethel Island matter dealt with, but also direct in line with the discussion here to have our staff take a look at it, make sure that factually we haven't got ourselves tripped up. And it may not necessitate having to have both alternatives in the environmental document, because we may be able to get enough around with your motion that you've offered, the language you offered, Dan, we may take care of it. But I do think we ought to take a look at those maps and make sure that we're knowledgeable in taking this action about what that reflects 92 versus today, which and there's some speculation about what might occur between now and when this plan's adopted.
I think we're talking about 8 communities, and I suspect if the Protection Commission staff can spend time with the plans that were in place in 1992 and the current plans, they can let us know whether there's any discrepancies, and that would be very helpful.
And just one note, I know that in the 1992 general plan in Sacramento County, they used a more kind of I don't say it was a broad brush, but it was kind of a brush stroke approach, a crayon approach to the coloring. And in the more recently adopted general plan the county took up just a few months ago, we defined that with boundaries and that's part of what our consistency going forward to the commission. But it was subject to some interpretation, and in order to try to be more clear to conform with both what we anticipated with the Delta plan as well as the Land Use Resource Management plan, we took a more precise approach to that. And so again, you may get into the midst of that discussion between counties, commission, and our staff. I don't want to get you bogged down and get a lot of work before you, but it's an important enough issue. So I would, I'd be comfortable.
We may find the 1992 plans allowed more development in those communities than is allowed today.
Yeah, I just don't
potentially.
know. I don't know. Okay.
At least in one case, I think.
Okay.